Welcome to another deep dive. This time we're exploring Ramadan fasting. And I'm telling you, we're going to uncover some fascinating stuff here.
Yeah, even if you think you already know the basics, I bet will surprise you.
Exactly. Okay, I'm hooked. So let's back up for a sec. What is Ramadan really for someone who maybe just has that surface level understanding?
So it's the 9th month of the Islamic lunar calendar, and it commemorates when the Quran was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad. And because it's lunar, it actually moves back about 11 days each year compared to our solar calendar. So this year it should be starting around March 1st.
Whoa, so it's like every year the whole experience of Ramadan changes. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's totally different to fast when it's like the heat of summer versus shorter days and cooler weather. And that's just one piece of the puzzle. Because fasting during Ramadan is also one of the 5 pillars of Islam, the core acts of the faith.
Oh yeah, the 5 pillars. I remember that from the overview. Faith, prayer, charity, pilgrimage, and fasting during Ramadan. It's like the core tenets.
You got it. And with all of them, but especially during Ramadan, is this idea of taqwa, striving to do what's right and be close to God.
Taqwa. I saw that word a lot in the chaplain's notes, but it didn't really explain it. The overview said no food, no drink, no intimacy from dawn till sunset. But is it really just about depriving yourself?
No, it's way more nuanced than that. Think of it more like a reset. Like, yeah, you abstain from physical needs, but that's meant to heighten your spiritual awareness. It's a discipline, kind of like a mental and spiritual workout.
A workout. I like that analogy. So it's not about punishing yourself. It's about pushing yourself to grow in a different way.
And a huge part of that growth is empathy. Fasting can actually make you much more aware of people who go hungry, not by choice. It makes you more compassionate and reminds you that we're all connected.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so you're here with us on the deep dive because, well, you want to get to the bottom of things, right? You want to understand what really matters, and you want to do it pretty quickly, I'd imagine.
That's the goal, right? Cut through all the noise and get straight to those core insights.
Exactly. And that's precisely what we're going to do today. We're going to be taking a deep dive into a practice that's observed by millions upon millions of people worldwide. The Islamic practice of fasting during the month of Ramadan.
It's a topic that many people have heard of, but maybe don't fully grasp. And that's where we come in.
We're going to try to unpack it all for you.
Yeah.
So our mission today is pretty clear. We want to extract the most important guidance and understanding around this fundamental act of worship in Islam.
We want to address some of the common misunderstandings that people might have about fasting during Ramadan.
And most importantly, we want to get to the heart of what this practice truly means for Muslims around the world.
So where should we begin?
Well, I think the best place to start is with the foundational text itself, the Quran. What does the Quran actually say about fasting?
Well, the very first verse that addresses fasting is in Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 183. It states, "Decreed upon you is fasting, as it was decreed upon those before you, that you may become righteous."
Okay, so right off the bat, we see this connection between fasting and achieving righteousness or taqwa.
Yes, and taqwa is a really important concept in Islam. It encompasses so much more than just abstaining from food and drink.
Right. It's about developing self-controlled discipline, a heightened awareness of our actions and intentions.
It's about aligning yourself with the will of God.
So you could say that Ramadan is like this annual training program for the soul aimed at cultivating those very virtues.
That's a great way to put it.
Right.
And it's interesting that the verse mentions that fasting was decreed upon those before you as well.
Right. So this isn't just a concept that's unique to Islam.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It suggests that there's a universal element to fasting, this idea that abstaining from physical pleasures can lead to spiritual growth.
It's something that you find in various faith traditions throughout history.
And it speaks to something deep within human nature, this yearning for something beyond the material.
Now, moving on to the next verse, Al-Baqarah 184, this verse gets into the specifics of who is obligated to fast and when.
Right. It mentions a limited number of days, referring, of course, to the month of Ramadan. But it also introduces this really important aspect of flexibility.
Right. It's not meant to be this rigid, burdensome practice.
The verse states that for those who are ill or on a journey, they can fast an equal number of days at another time.
So there's this understanding that individual circumstances need to be taken into account.
Exactly. And it goes even further than that. It mentions the concept of a ransom feeding the poor for those who are capable of fasting, but might face significant difficulty doing so.
So there are options for those who, for legitimate reasons, can't fast for the entire month.
And then it adds this beautiful layer. Whoever volunteers excess it is better for him, It encourages going above and beyond what's strictly required.
So it's not just about fulfilling the bare minimum, it's about striving for excellence in your worship.
Exactly. And the verse concludes with a very powerful statement. But to fast is best for you if you only knew.
So even with the exemptions and the option of a ransom, there's still something inherently beneficial in the act of fasting itself.
There's a deeper wisdom there that might not be immediately obvious.
Now let's move on to Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 185. This verse really puts Ramadan into the broader context of divine revelation.
It states, "The month of Ramadan is that in which was revealed the Quran, a guidance for the people and clear proofs of guidance and criterion."
So we see here that Ramadan is fundamentally linked to the very beginning of divine revelation.
It's not just a period of fasting. It's a time of intense spiritual focus, a time when both the body and the soul are being nourished.
And this is a key takeaway for our listeners. The connection between Ramadan fasting and the divine guidance of the Quran is inseparable.
Fasting becomes a companion to reflection on the Quran, to understanding its message, and is striving to live according to its teachings.
So it's not just about abstaining from food and drink, it's about connecting with the divine word.
And the verse also reiterates the obligation to fast for whoever sights the new moon of Ramadan, and again provides the exception for those who are ill or traveling.
So we see this consistency in the principles that are being laid out.
Now, the Quran provides the framework, but the hadith offer further layers of understanding, particularly when it comes to the spiritual rewards of fasting.
Absolutely. There's this one hadith that's particularly powerful. It states, "Whoever fasts Ramadan out of faith and seeking reward his previous sins will be forgiven."
That's an incredible promise. It highlights the immense potential for spiritual renewal and purification during this month.
And it really emphasizes the mercy that's inherent in this practice.
But notice the condition, out of faith and seeking reward.
Right. So it's not just about going through the motions.
It's about the sincerity of your intention, the purity of your heart.
And there's another well-known hadith about the arrival of Ramadan itself.
The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, "When Ramadan begins, the gates of paradise are opened, the gates of hell are closed, and the devils are chained."
Now, this is obviously symbolic language, but it conveys a really powerful message.
It suggests that the spiritual atmosphere itself shifts during Ramadan.
It becomes a time of heightened spiritual opportunity, a time when it's easier to do good and to resist temptation.
Exactly. So having explored the spiritual benefits of fasting, let's turn our attention to the practical observance of Ramadan. And it all begins with intention, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The concept of niyya, or intention, is central to almost every act of worship in Islam.
It's about consciously dedicating your fast to seeking God's pleasure.
It's not just about going without food and drink, it's about why you're doing it.
And hand in hand with intention comes preparation.
Right. And this preparation is both physical and spiritual.
Spiritually, it might involve increasing voluntary prayers, reflecting on past shortcomings, and seeking forgiveness.
And setting goals for personal growth during Ramadan.
Physically, it could involve adjusting your sleep schedule and preparing your body for the change in eating patterns.
And of course, there's the community spirit that's so integral to Ramadan.
The breaking of the fast each evening, the iftar, often becomes a communal affair, bringing families and communities together.
You'll see mosques hosting communal iftars, and there's this real sense of solidarity and brotherhood as Muslims around the world are observing the fast together.
And these shared moments really strengthen bonds and foster a sense of belonging.
Now, the principles of Ramadan extend beyond the act of fasting itself, and they can be integrated into our daily lives in really meaningful ways.
For example, consider the aspect of health and well-being.
While the primary focus is spiritual, many people find that fasting can have a really positive effect on their physical health.
It can lead to more mindful eating habits outside of fasting hours, and it can give your digestive system a much-needed break.
And then there's the emphasis on charity and generosity, or sadaqah.
Ramadan is a time when people are more mindful of those who are less fortunate, and you often see a significant increase in charitable giving during this month.
People are more likely to volunteer their time or donate to those in need.
And of course, we can't overlook the importance of personal reflection.
The time that you spend fasting can create space for increased prayer, reading the Quran, and simply contemplating your life and your relationship with God.
It's a chance to step back from the busyness of everyday life and to focus on what truly matters.
Now, it's important to address some of the common misconceptions that people might have about Ramadan fasting.
One misconception is that fasting is some kind of punishment, or that it's just this really harsh ordeal.
But as I've discussed, the Islamic teachings really emphasize that it's a path towards spiritual purification, a way to cleanse the heart and to draw closer to God.
It's about self-discipline, but it's undertaken for a higher purpose.
Another area of confusion is around the exemptions and the flexibility that Islam provides.
The Quran is very clear that those who are ill or traveling are not required to fast.
And they can make up those days later when they're able to.
It's really about understanding the spirit of the law, which prioritizes well-being and compassion alongside spiritual devotion.
And finally, it's important to distinguish between the core religious obligations and the various cultural practices that have developed around Ramadan in different parts of the world.
While those cultural traditions can enrich the experience, they shouldn't overshadow the fundamental spiritual aspects of fasting.
The essence of Ramadan is about connecting with God and striving for righteousness.
And that's something that transcends culture and tradition.
So to sum it all up for our listeners, we've seen that Ramadan fasting is so much more than just abstaining from food and drink.
It's a deeply spiritual practice rooted in the Quran and the traditions of the Prophet Muhammad.
It's a time for spiritual growth, self-discipline, and community building.
And we hope that this deep dive has given you a clearer understanding of what Ramadan is all about.
Now here's a final thought for you to consider. We've talked about how Ramadan fosters self-discipline, reflection, and a strong sense of community.
These are all incredibly valuable qualities, and they're not limited to just 1 month out of the year.
So think about how you can incorporate those principles into your own life, regardless of your faith or background.
How can you cultivate more self-discipline in your daily routine?
How can you make time for reflection and introspection?
And how can you strengthen your connections with your community?
These are all questions worth pondering, and we hope that this deep dive has given you some food for thought.
Thanks for joining us.
And until next time, keep diving deep.